I'm Morgan Reynolds, 32, and I never thought I'd see the day my sister Allison would be begging for my help. As I sat across from her in the conference room of Reynolds Architectural Design, watching her mascara streak down her face, I couldn't help but remember her words from 3 years ago. "This family business isn't for you, Morgan. You lack the killer instinct." Now she sat desperate, her $40 million credit line frozen, the business our father built crumbling under her leadership, and a trail of financial misconduct I'd quietly documented. The revenge I never planned was finally serving itself. Before I dive into how my sister's empire came crashing down, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This family business drama took place in Chicago, but karma works the same everywhere, right? If this story of patience and justice resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of family betrayal and eventual accountability. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up as a Reynolds meant living in the shadow of greatness. My father, James Reynolds, had built Reynolds Architectural Design from nothing into one of Chicago's most respected architecture firms. His visionary approach to sustainable urban development had transformed the city skyline and earned him countless awards. My mother, Catherine, had been his rock throughout, managing the household with the same precision Dad applied to his blueprints. From an early age, the differences between me and my sister Allison were apparent. 7 years, my senior at 39, Allison had inherited our father's charismatic presence and bold vision. She could charm clients with a single smile, making grand promises that left them eager to sign contracts. I, on the other hand, was more like our mother, thoughtful, detail-oriented, and methodical. Where Allison saw the big picture, I noticed the small details that could make or break a project. Despite our differences, our father never played favorites. A successful business needs both vision and precision. He would say during our Sunday dinner discussions about the company, "Allison can see the forest. Morgan can see the trees. Together, you two could build something even greater than I have." I pursued my education with that balance in mind, earning my MBA with a focus on sustainable business practices, hoping to modernize my father's commitment to environmental architecture. During summers and after graduation, I worked in various departments of Reynolds Architectural, learning the business from the ground up while Allison fast-tracked to executive positions. What troubled me, even then, were the corners Allison cut to achieve her goals. When client budgets were tight, she'd suggest cheaper materials without explaining the longevity implications. When deadlines loomed, she'd push teams to skip steps in the quality control process. Dad would correct these issues when he caught them, but Allison was getting better at hiding her shortcuts. Then came the day that changed everything. Dad's unexpected heart attack during a client presentation left the company reeling. I was in Seattle, presenting our latest green building initiative at a conference. The call from Mom came just as I stepped off stage. I flew home immediately, but by the time I arrived at the hospital, things looked grim. Dad was conscious but weak when I finally got to see him. Allison had barely left his side, already discussing company matters despite the doctor's warnings about stress. When we had a moment alone, Dad squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Morgan," he whispered, "the company will need your eye for detail now more than ever. Promise me you'll stick with it, no matter what." I promised through tears, not understanding then the full weight of what he was asking. 3 days later, James Reynolds was gone, and the reading of his will brought the first shock. Dad had left 60% ownership to Allison and 40% to me, with a letter explaining his decision. My daughters complement each other perfectly. Allison's vision, with Morgan's precision, will honor my legacy and take Reynolds Architectural to new heights. Each balances the other's strengths and weaknesses. Allison maintained a perfect grieving daughter facade through the funeral, accepting condolences with dignified tears. But the mask slipped the morning after, during the first executive meeting without Dad. I arrived early to find her already seated at the head of the table, Dad's chair. "We need to discuss restructuring," she announced once everyone was settled. "Given our new reality, we need to streamline operations." By streamlining, she meant demoting me from my Director of Sustainability position to Project Manager, stripping me of decision-making power while keeping my name on the masthead to satisfy Dad's old clients who valued the Reynolds family connection. When I protested, citing Dad's wishes for us to lead together, Allison's response cut deeper than any knife could have. In front of the entire executive team, my sister looked me directly in the eyes and said, "This family business isn't for you, Morgan. You lack the killer instinct. You always have. I'm doing you a favor by keeping you involved at all." The room fell silent. Benjamin Wilson, our CFO and Dad's oldest friend, looked down at his notepad. No one dared contradict the new majority owner. That night, I sobbed in my apartment, ready to walk away from it all. The company felt like a physical reminder of both my father's absence and my sister's betrayal. I called Mom, expecting her to support whatever decision I made. "Your father knew this might happen," Mom said instead, surprising me. "He told me once that Allison's greatest weakness was her impatience. She wants results now. Consequences be damned. But your father always played the long game, Morgan. He believed you did too. So I should just accept being sidelined in my own family's company?" I asked, anger rising through my grief. "I'm saying you should remember what your father taught you about foundations," Mom replied. "The most important parts of a building are often invisible to most people, but they determine whether the structure stands or falls." That conversation changed my trajectory. Instead of quitting, I decided to stay, to document everything, and to build alliances with those who remembered my father's values. Benjamin was the first to offer subtle support, catching me after a particularly contentious board meeting. "Your father valued your judgment more than you know," he said quietly, making sure no one could overhear. "Keep your eyes open, Morgan. The company may need you in ways neither of you yet understand." My new role as project manager came with an unexpected silver lining. Instead of overseeing broad sustainability initiatives, I now had direct access to project-specific financial records I would never have seen otherwise. At first, I focused solely on doing my job well, ensuring the projects under my supervision maintained the Reynolds standard of excellence despite Allison's push for faster completion times. The first red flag appeared about 2 months after Dad's passing. I was reviewing material purchases for the Lakeshore Drive condominium project when I noticed discrepancies between what we'd billed the client for and what we'd actually used. Premium sustainable materials listed on the client invoice had been substituted with standard options, with the difference apparently vanishing into thin air. I approached Rachel Jenkins, our materials manager who'd been with Dad since the early days, to clarify what I'd found. She closed her office door before speaking. "This has been happening more frequently," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Reynolds, Allison, has been authorizing substitutions after client approvals. When I questioned it, I was told it was a temporary measure to improve cash flow during the transition." "Are these changes documented anywhere?" I asked. Rachel's uncomfortable silence told me everything I needed to know. That night, I created a secure cloud storage account, accessible only through 2-factor authentication, and began documenting everything I found. I set up a pattern of working late when the office was empty, methodically photographing documents, creating spreadsheets, tracking discrepancies, and recording dates, times, and names associated with each irregularity. Within weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. Beyond the material substitutions, company funds were being redirected through a maze of expense codes. Luxury expenditures appeared as business necessities. A new Aspen vacation property listed as a client retreat facility, a yacht categorized as transportation assets, private jet usage masked as expedited project oversight. Allison's personal lifestyle had undergone a radical transformation since Dad's death. While Dad had lived comfortably but modestly, believing in reinvesting profits into the business and employee benefits, Allison now graced the society pages at exclusive events, wearing designer clothes and jewels that cost more than some of our employees made in a year. I approached Benjamin carefully, bringing printouts of what I'd found to his home rather than the office. His face grew grim as he reviewed the evidence. "I've noticed similar concerns," he confirmed, "but nothing this extensive. Allison has been limiting my access to certain accounts, claiming she's streamlining financial oversight. Should we confront her?" I asked. Benjamin shook his head firmly. "Not yet. She has majority control, and without irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing, she could simply remove both of us. Continue documenting everything, but be careful. Start backing up your personal files too. I suspect she'll look for reasons to push you out completely once the initial mourning period for your father has passed. I followed his advice, expanding my investigation while maintaining a facade of submissive acceptance of my reduced role. Working late one night, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A network of shell companies with variations of Allison's initials and birth date in their registration numbers. Company funds were being funneled through these entities in amounts just small enough to avoid triggering automatic financial alert. More disturbing still, I found evidence that Allison had been submitting falsified financial reports to banks and investors, inflating the company's profitability while hiding growing debt. The most serious discovery came 6 months into my investigation. Documentation showing Allison had used company assets as collateral for substantial personal loans, putting the entire business at risk without board approval. I expanded my documentation system, making multiple copies stored in different secure locations. I carefully identified potential witnesses for each type of misconduct, creating a detailed timeline of when each pattern of behavior began and escalated. The ethical struggle kept me awake at night. This wasn't just business, this was family. Was I betraying my sister by compiling evidence against her? Or was I honoring my father by protecting the company he'd built? I reached out to Diana Choi, a corporate lawyer friend from business school, being careful to speak hypothetically. If someone discovers financial misconduct in a family business, what's their obligation? I asked over coffee, far from the office. Legally speaking, officers of a company have a fiduciary duty to the business itself, Diana explained. Ignoring fraud could potentially make you liable as well. Family dynamics complicate things emotionally, but not legally. Still, I couldn't bring myself to act immediately. Part of me hoped Allison would recognize the danger and course correct before things became irreparable. Another part feared the complete fracturing of our already damaged family. So I continued to monitor and document, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps for circumstances to force my hand. 18 months after our father's death, I had compiled an extensive dossier documenting Allison's financial misconduct. My external hard drives contained enough evidence to trigger multiple investigations, yet I continued to hesitate on taking definitive action. Meanwhile, Allison's confidence grew proportionally with her recklessness, seemingly emboldened by the lack of consequences. The watershed moment came when Reynolds Architectural secured the contract for Chicago's downtown revitalization project, a $200 million deal that would transform a neglected area into a sustainable mixed-use development. It was exactly the type of project our father had built his reputation on, combining innovation with community impact. Allison organized an elaborate press conference, standing before a forest of microphones to announce the contract. This project represents the new direction of Reynolds architectural design, she proclaimed, not once mentioning that it was my sustainable development proposal, created before Dad's death and submitted despite her objections, that had won over the city selection committee. What the cameras didn't capture was the months of behind-the-scenes work I had done, meeting with community organizations, environmental groups, and local businesses to address concerns and build support. The committee chair had privately told me it was this comprehensive stakeholder engagement, a hallmark of our father's approach that I had maintained, that had given us the edge over competitors. The downtown project brought us into closer contact with Michael Thompson, the banker handling our company's credit line at First National, a methodical man with calculating eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Thompson had been our father's financial partner for decades. He seemed increasingly uncomfortable with Allison's grandiose projections during quarterly reviews. With the downtown contract secured, Allison made her most audacious move yet, announcing Reynolds Architectural would expand into luxury residential development, acting as both designer and builder on high-end properties throughout Chicago's Gold Coast. This vertical integration required massive capital investment in construction capabilities we'd previously contracted out. During the board meeting where she presented this plan, I raised concerns about the financial exposure and departure from our core expertise. The capital requirements and construction risks are substantial, I pointed out, and we'd be competing against established developers with decades of experience in this market segment. Allison's dismissal was swift and public. "Your small thinking is exactly why I'm leading this company, and not you," she said, generating uncomfortable chuckles from her supporters on the board. Sometimes you need to make bold moves to stay relevant. Dad understood that. It was a fundamental misreading of our father's business philosophy, which had always emphasized calculated growth and risk management. But the board approved her plan with minimal questions. 2 weeks later, Allison secured a $40 million credit line extension from First National Bank, bringing our total potential debt to alarming levels. Through Karen Martinez, Allison's executive assistant, who had grown increasingly concerned about her boss's behavior, I obtained copies of the financial statements submitted to the bank. The documents showed blatant misrepresentation of our cash reserves, projected revenue, and existing debt obligations. Allison had altered financial statements to show a company in much stronger position than reality. She had me prepare 2 versions of each report, Karen confided during a hushed conversation in the parking garage. One with the actual numbers for internal use, and a presentation version for external stakeholders. I didn't realize at first what I was participating in. Karen began discreetly providing me with copies of Allison's correspondence with banks and investors, adding crucial evidence to my growing documentation. The picture these documents painted was alarming. Reynolds Architectural was approaching a financial crisis while expanding at an unsustainable rate. Allison seemed to sense growing scrutiny. She began replacing longtime executives with new hires loyal to her vision, people who asked few questions and were dazzled by her charisma. Benjamin warned me his days as CFO were likely numbered. "She's brought in this young hotshot from Manhattan to consult on financial strategy," he told me during our now regular off-site meetings. Classic move before replacing someone in my position. I continued my careful balancing act, appearing supportive and non-threatening in meetings while meticulously tracking every financial irregularity. I positioned myself as someone focused solely on project execution, rather than company direction, hoping Allison would continue to underestimate me. It was a performance that drained me daily, but kept me in position to protect what remained of our father's legacy. The weight of carrying secrets is rarely acknowledged until your shoulders begin to buckle. As I approached the 2-year anniversary of my father's death, the personal toll of my double life became increasingly apparent. The stress of maintaining my documentation while presenting a compliant face to Allison manifested in tension headaches, disrupted sleep, and a persistent knot in my stomach that no amount of tea or yoga could dissolve. My relationship with David, an environmental engineer I'd been dating since before Dad died, became another casualty. What had started as understanding, "Of course you need to cancel," family business comes first, gradually transformed into frustration. You're always either at work or thinking about work. And finally, resentment. It's like you're in a relationship with your family drama, not me. The night he finally ended things, standing in my apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes from the move-in we'd planned, I couldn't even find the words to explain why I couldn't let go of the situation at Reynolds. "I don't even recognize you anymore, Morgan," were his parting words. "You're so consumed by whatever game you're playing with your sister that there's nothing left for anyone else." He wasn't entirely wrong. The documentation had begun as protection but had evolved into something more consuming, a mission that colonized my thoughts even in rare moments of leisure. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect my father's legacy, I'd abandoned many of his principles about work-life balance. Mom noticed too. Her health had begun to decline after Dad's death, the grief manifesting in physical ways her doctors struggled to name precisely. During my weekly visits to her home, she increasingly commented on my appearance. The dark circles under my eyes, the weight loss, the distracted responses to her questions. "Your father never wanted the business to consume either of you," she said during one Sunday lunch, reaching across the table to take my hand. "He valued the company, but he valued his daughters more." The guilt I felt at not confronting Allison directly grew with every conversation with Mom. Was I protecting the company? Or was I simply avoiding the terrifying prospect of direct conflict with my only sister? That afternoon, after helping Mom with some household tasks, I found myself drawn to Dad's home office, preserved exactly as he'd left it. With Mom napping, I began looking through his bookshelves, seeking some connection to his wisdom. Behind his collection of architectural texts, I discovered a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The journal contained Dad's private thoughts on the business over the years, including candid assessments of both Allison and me. The entries about Allison revealed he'd been more aware of her ethical shortcuts than I'd realized. A. Pushed boundaries again with the Lakefront project. One entry from 5 years earlier read, "Talent and vision undeniable, but increasingly concerned about methods. Discussed importance of reputation again. Temporary gains never worth long-term trust damage." Another entry, dated just months before his death. Weighing ownership structure options. A's drive essential, but needs M's ethical compass as counterbalance. Must find way to ensure neither can act unilaterally on major decisions. The journal confirmed what I'd suspected. Dad had intended us to balance each other, not for one to dominate. His final structure hadn't fully achieved this protection due to his unexpected death before completing the legal frameworks. With renewed clarity but increasing concern about the company's trajectory, I began building a more formal contingency plan. I secured trusted allies in key departments, people whose loyalty was to the company's long-term health rather than to either Reynolds' sister personally. Benjamin and I created an emergency business continuity plan that could be implemented if Allison's actions triggered a true crisis. We identified essential projects that would need protection, key client relationships to maintain, and steps to stabilize operations in various worst-case scenarios. I reached out to Harold Wilson, a retired architecture executive who had been my father's mentor and remained a family friend. Over dinner at his North Shore home, safely away from industry gossip, I shared a carefully edited version of my concerns. "Your father often spoke of the different strengths you and your sister brought to the table," Harold said, swirling his whiskey thoughtfully. He worried sometimes about what would happen if either of you had unchecked authority. "I'm concerned about some of Allison's recent decisions," I admitted, understating dramatically. "If things reach a critical point, would you consider stepping in temporarily to help stabilize the company? The employees and clients trust your reputation." Harold studied me with shrewd eyes that had witnessed decades of business dramas. "James would have wanted me to help his daughters if needed," he finally said. "If it comes to that, you can count on me, but only if both the company and your family are at genuine risk." Preparing financially for potential fallout, I secured a personal loan using my condo as collateral, creating a financial safety net independent of company funds or my Reynolds stock. If Allison discovered my documentation and forced me out, I would need resources to sustain myself through what could be lengthy legal proceedings. I completed a comprehensive dossier of all financial misconduct evidence, organized chronologically and by severity. Diana helped me understand which actions constituted civil violations versus potential criminal offenses, providing clarity on the potential consequences of different reporting options. The ethical considerations weighed heavily as I contemplated going to authorities. Would reporting Allison's actions honor my father's legacy or destroy it completely? Would the resulting investigations damage innocent employees and clients? Could the company survive the public scrutiny? These questions haunted me as I made final preparations, deciding to have everything ready but to wait for either a clear sign or an imminent threat to the company's survival before acting. The decision point nearly arrived prematurely, when Allison almost discovered my documentation during an unexpected visit to my office while I was reviewing bank correspondence. I barely managed to close the files before she entered, but the close call highlighted her growing suspicion. Comments about my excessive interest in financial details outside my department and inquiries into my after-hours presence at the office suggested she was actively looking for reasons to remove me completely. If you've ever carried a secret that could tear your family apart, you know the isolation I felt during this period. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if I'd confronted Allison directly after those first discoveries. Would she have changed course? Or would she have simply pushed me out sooner? Has anyone else been forced to document a loved one's misconduct while hoping you'd never need to use it? Drop a comment below if you faced a similar impossible choice between family loyalty and doing what's right. 8 months into construction on the downtown revitalization project, what should have been Reynolds Architectural's crowning achievement began showing alarming signs of trouble. As project manager for the sustainability components, I wasn't directly involved in the structural elements. But Jason Parker, the lead project manager, approached me with concerns he felt were being ignored through official channels. The concrete being used for the main structural supports doesn't match the specifications in our approved plans, he explained, showing me site photos on his tablet as we met in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. When I raised this with the construction director, he said the changes were approved by Allison to streamline costs while maintaining safety margins. Jason's concern wasn't just about contractual compliance. The grade being used isn't rated for the load-bearing requirements in our design. I've also noticed they're rushing through inspections, sometimes having them signed off before they're even completed. My stomach dropped as I swiped through his documentation. "Have you taken this to the city inspector?" I asked. "I tried," Jason replied, frustration evident. But somehow my appointment was canceled before I arrived. When I rescheduled, I was told the matter had already been addressed at a higher level. That's when I decided to come to you. I promised Jason I would investigate discreetly, knowing that his career could be at risk for sharing this information. Back at my apartment that evening, I compared the original structural engineering specifications with the actual materials delivery records Karen had been providing me. The discrepancies were significant and potentially dangerous. Through Benjamin, I arranged for an independent structural engineer to conduct an unofficial assessment of the construction site, posing as a prospective client interested in Reynolds' methods. His report confirmed our worst fears. Several critical structural elements showed early signs of stress they shouldn't exhibit for decades, and numerous safety protocols had been circumvented. I faced a defining ethical dilemma. Speaking up meant potentially exposing all of Allison's misconduct, triggering the very crisis I'd been hoping to avoid. Staying silent meant putting public safety at risk when the building eventually opened. My father's voice seemed to echo in my mind. Architecture isn't just about creating beautiful spaces. It's a public trust. People's lives depend on our integrity. After a sleepless night, I used an anonymous email account to send key documentation to the city's building safety department, carefully removing any information that could identify the source. I included enough technical details to warrant an immediate inspection, but excluded the broader financial misconduct evidence. The response was swift. 3 days later, the city issued a partial work stoppage order pending a comprehensive safety review. News crews descended on the project site, with speculation running rampant about what had triggered the sudden scrutiny of Chicago's highest-profile development project. Allison was livid. She called an emergency staff meeting, her usual polished appearance showing signs of strain, hair slightly disheveled, makeup applied in haste. "Someone in this room has betrayed this company," she announced, scanning faces with cold intensity. "Someone has provided misleading information to city officials in an attempt to sabotage our flagship project. I want to make it clear that when I identify this person, and I will, they will face the full legal consequences of their actions." Her gaze lingered on me. Some people have never understood what it takes to run a successful business in today's competitive environment. Some people hide behind idealistic notions while lacking the courage to make necessary decisions. I maintained a neutral expression while my heart hammered against my ribs. Shouldn't our focus be on addressing the inspection concerns so we can resume construction? I suggested, careful to keep my tone collaborative rather than confrontational. "That's exactly what someone who created this problem would say," Allison shot back, trying to appear reasonable after stabbing the company in the back. Benjamin intervened, his calm voice a stark contrast to Allison's barely controlled fury. "Perhaps Morgan has a point. The immediate priority is resolving the work stoppage. We can address internal matters afterward." The witch hunt continued behind the scenes, with Allison ordering IT to review all employee emails and calling staff in for one-on-one loyalty interrogations. Though she clearly suspected me, she had no concrete proof of my involvement, and I had been careful to use only personal devices and accounts unconnected to company systems for my documentation activities. An emergency board meeting was called to address the crisis. Allison presented the situation as a minor technical misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by overzealous city officials. She proposed allocating significant additional funds, without specifying their source, to expedite resolution through appropriate channels, a thinly veiled reference to using political connections and possible improper incentives. I spoke up, keeping my comments focused solely on proper procedures. Before allocating additional funds, shouldn't we have a complete engineering assessment to understand exactly what remediation is actually required? That would give us a proper budget framework. The suggestion was reasonable enough that even Allison's allies on the board nodded in agreement. This small intervention bought precious time, slowing down her attempt to throw money at covering up the problems rather than properly fixing them. News coverage intensified as journalists began questioning whether other Reynolds projects might have similar issues. A major client called an emergency meeting to discuss potentially pulling out of their contract if the safety concerns weren't addressed transparently. As pressure mounted from multiple directions, Allison's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began making decisions without consulting anyone, calling clients directly with promises she couldn't possibly keep, and spending less time in the office while more frequent deliveries from expensive liquor stores arrived at her penthouse apartment. Michael Thompson from First National Bank requested an emergency meeting to discuss the project crisis and its potential impact on our credit arrangements. As the noose began to tighten, I quietly finalized the contingency plans Benjamin and I had developed, sensing the breaking point was rapidly approaching. The documentation I'd spent 2 years compiling was organized, backed up, and ready if needed. The crisis had forced my hand in ways I hadn't anticipated. What began as protection against financial misconduct had evolved into a matter of public safety, with stakes far beyond family dynamics or corporate governance. My father had built his reputation on creating structures people could trust with their lives. I couldn't allow that legacy to be corrupted, no matter the personal cost. The meeting with First National Bank was scheduled for a Monday morning in the bank's downtown conference room, neutral territory that signaled the seriousness of their concerns. Allison insisted I accompany her, Benjamin, and our new financial consultant, a slick former investment banker named Trevor, who had been increasingly present in major decisions. They need to see a united Reynolds front, Allison explained. Though her real motivation was transparent, she wanted me where she could see me rather than potentially speaking to the bank separately. Michael Thompson greeted us with professional courtesy, but the presence of the bank's chief risk officer and a member of their legal team indicated this was no routine financial review. Their expressions remained impassive as Allison launched into a presentation filled with confident assertions about the downtown project's minor regulatory hiccups and the company's strong financial position. We anticipate the work stoppage will be fully resolved within 2 weeks, she claimed, despite having no confirmation from city inspectors. Our liquidity position remains strong, and Q3 projections show a 22% increase in billable hours across all divisions. I noticed Thompson's gaze flickering between the presentation slides and his own documentation, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. When Allison finished her polished performance, the silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. "Miss Reynolds," Thompson finally said, addressing Allison directly, "these projections seem at odds with the information we've been gathering. The city inspection reports suggest remediation will take months, not weeks, and will require substantial additional investment." Allison's smile remained fixed. City bureaucracy always overestimates timeframes. We have relationships that can expedite the process. Even more concerning, Thompson continued as if she hadn't spoken. "They've identified several discrepancies between the financial statements provided for your recent credit line increase and information we've subsequently obtained about your actual cash position and outstanding obligations." Trevor jumped in with technical explanations about standard accounting methodologies in development-focused architectural practices, but Thompson cut him off with a raised hand. "Given these concerns, First National is initiating a comprehensive review of Reynolds Architectural's financials before any further credit disbursements will be processed," he announced. "In the meantime, we're placing a temporary freeze on the $40 million credit line pending this review." The blood drained from Allison's face. The credit freeze would immediately impact the company's ability to meet payroll, vendor payments, and project commitments. She began arguing vehemently, her carefully maintained professional facade cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. I maintained a concerned but composed expression, positioning myself as someone equally surprised by these developments, while offering constructive suggestions. Perhaps we could provide additional documentation to clarify any misunderstandings, I suggested. We all want to ensure complete transparency. Thompson's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between us. That would be helpful, he agreed, especially regarding the discrepancies in collateral valuations and intercorporate transfers over the past 24 months. Allison shot me a suspicious glare as we left the meeting, but her attention was immediately consumed by urgent damage control. Back at the office, she locked herself in with Trevor and her most loyal executives, attempting to secure emergency funding from alternative sources. Benjamin and I met discreetly to prepare for the inevitable fallout. The credit freeze will become public knowledge by tomorrow, he predicted grimly. Vendors will start demanding immediate payment, project timelines will be jeopardized, and employees will panic about job security. Is there any way to protect the core business at this point, I asked. Only with complete transparency and a credible recovery plan, Benjamin replied. The bank needs evidence that the financial mismanagement was isolated and has been addressed. Without that, they'll maintain the freeze until the company collapses under its cash flow constraints. We both understood what addressing the financial mismanagement meant. Allison would need to be removed from control. Events accelerated rapidly over the next 48 hours. As Benjamin predicted, news of the credit freeze leaked to industry insiders, triggering a cascade of consequences. Major vendors began demanding payment in advance rather than extending traditional credit terms. Clients called with concerns about project completion. Talented staff started updating resumes and taking mysterious personal days for interviews elsewhere. Allison's increasingly desperate attempts to secure alternative financing proved futile. Her financial maneuvering had already maxed out the company's borrowing capacity, and potential investors were scared off by the regulatory issues with the downtown project. 3 days after the bank meeting, the board called an emergency session. By then, I had provided Michael Thompson with a carefully curated selection of my documentation, enough to justify the bank's continued credit freeze without yet triggering criminal investigations, focusing primarily on misrepresentations to financial institutions and misuse of company funds. The board meeting began with Allison presenting her emergency plan, which involved selling valuable company assets at fire sale prices to generate immediate cash. When board members questioned the long-term impact of such desperate measures, she lashed out, blaming sabotage and disloyal elements for the company's predicament. As Allison's presentation devolved into increasingly unhinged accusations, Benjamin quietly distributed copies of a financial analysis showing the true extent of the company's position, including documentation of how company funds had been diverted to Allison's personal use and how financial statements had been falsified to obtain credit. This information has been provided to First National Bank, Benjamin explained calmly. They've indicated they would consider lifting the credit freeze only under new leadership and with a transparent remediation plan. All eyes turned to me. Though I hadn't planned this moment, I'd prepared for it. I presented a concise overview of steps needed to stabilize the company: temporary leadership changes, financial restructuring, transparent communication with stakeholders, and a realistic timeline for the downtown project remediation. The board deliberation was surprisingly brief. With the company facing imminent collapse, they voted to temporarily suspend Allison pending a complete investigation and appointed me as interim CEO, with Benjamin continuing as CFO and Harold Wilson brought in as a special advisor to restore client and industry confidence. Allison sat in stunned silence as the vote proceeded, her expression cycling through shock, rage, and finally a cold calculation I recognized all too well. As the meeting concluded, she gathered her belongings with deliberate calm. "This isn't over," she said quietly, looking directly at me. "You've wanted this all along, haven't you?" The dutiful daughter finally showing her true ambition. The board members filed out uncomfortably, leaving us alone in the conference room that had witnessed so many family dynamics disguised as business decisions. "This was never about ambition, Allison," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice remained. "It was about protecting what Dad built, for all of us, including you." Her laugh was bitter and hollow. "How noble. I'm sure that will comfort the employees when this company crumbles without my leadership. As she reached the door, she turned back with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between fury and desperation. You have no idea what you've done, she said. No idea what's coming. I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would prove to be, or that within 24 hours, she would be back in this same room, mascara streaking down her face, begging for my help. The morning after the board's decision, I arrived at the office before dawn. The weight of responsibility felt simultaneously crushing and clarifying. For the first time in years, I could act openly to protect my father's legacy rather than documenting its destruction from the shadows. I chose to work from my own office rather than immediately claiming Allison's or our father's. This wasn't about symbolically asserting authority. It was about stabilizing a company in crisis. Benjamin and I spent the early hours coordinating our response plan. Communications to employees, clients, and vendors. Meetings with project managers to assess cash flow requirements, and preparations for the financial forensic team the bank was sending. Harold Wilson had agreed to arrive by noon to help with client reassurance calls. At 10:37 a.m., my office door burst open without a knock. Allison stood in the doorway, looking both disheveled and dangerous, like a wounded predator. Her designer outfit from yesterday was notably rumpled, her eyes red-rimmed from either lack of sleep or tears. Possibly both. My access cards are deactivated, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. My email is suspended. My calls to our banking partners are being refused. I rose slowly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. We should talk privately. In Dad's office, she countered immediately. If we're going to do this, let's do it where it matters. I nodded, following her to the large corner office our father had occupied for decades. The space remained largely unchanged since his death. Allison had chosen to work from a newly designed executive suite rather than disturb what had become something of a shrine. As soon as the door closed behind us, Allison's controlled facade crumbled. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded, pacing like a caged animal. 3 years of strategic positioning, relationship building, and market development, destroyed because you couldn't handle not being Daddy's favorite anymore. This isn't about favoritism, I replied, working to keep my voice level. It's about falsified financial statements to banks, misappropriation of company funds, and cutting corners on safety-critical elements of our biggest project. Business necessities, she shouted, slamming her hand on our father's desk. Do you think this company would have survived in today's market with Dad's outdated ethical constraints? His generation had the luxury of principles because competition wasn't global and margins weren't razor thin. The margins were thin because you were siphoning funds, Allison, I said, finally allowing some of my long-suppressed anger to surface. I have documented transfers to your personal accounts and shell companies totaling over $12 million in the past 2 years. Her expression flickered. Surprise that I knew specific amounts quickly masked by renewed defiance. Compensation for the value I created. The risks I took to position us for growth. Risks with other people's money. The banks, the shareholders, the employees' pension fund, I countered. And now those chickens have come home to roost. The bank isn't just concerned about the credit line anymore. They're talking about pressing charges for fraud. This finally penetrated her defensive rage. Allison sank into our father's chair, momentarily looking small and vulnerable. They wouldn't dare. The Reynolds name still means something in this city. Exactly why they can't ignore this. No special treatment, or they'd face accusations of favoritism toward powerful families. The fight seemed to drain from her temporarily as the reality of her situation sank in. In that moment, I saw flashes of the sister I'd once admired, the one who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with calculus homework. Before ambition and competition had corroded our relationship. How long have you been gathering evidence against me? She asked quietly. Since about 3 months after Dad died, I admitted. After you demoted me and started changing the company's direction. Her bitter laugh held no humor. Always the patient one. I underestimated that about you. You underestimated a lot of things, I said. Not unkindly. Including what this company means to me. Family should stick together, she said, an edge returning to her voice. No matter what. That's what Dad always said. Family shouldn't steal from family, I countered. or put family members' reputations at risk with fraudulent practices. That's not what Dad meant, and you know it. The conversation cycled through accusations, justifications, and recriminations, 3 years of suppressed conflict exploding in our father's office under his watchful portrait. Allison alternately threatened legal action, attempted to justify her actions as necessary business measures, and accused me of orchestrating a coup out of jealousy. The most painful moment came when she invoked our childhood. "Remember when you broke Mom's favorite vase?" she asked. "I took the blame because you were so scared. I always protected you, and this is how you repay that loyalty?" This isn't about a vase, Allison. It's about a company with 300 employees and dozens of projects that impact thousands of people. The stakes aren't the same. Eventually, exhaustion tempered the emotional intensity, leading to an uneasy stalemate. Allison finally asked the practical question, "What happens now?" I outlined the options the board and legal team had presented. A resignation citing health reasons, allowing her to save face publicly, while the financial issues would be attributed to accounting irregularities discovered during leadership transition, or fighting the removal, which would likely lead to more public disclosure of the specific allegations and potential criminal charges. "You've thought of everything," she said, a mixture of bitterness and reluctant respect in her tone. "I had 2 years to prepare while hoping I'd never need to use any of it," I replied honestly. Mom insisted on hosting Sunday dinner, despite the corporate drama, creating perhaps the most excruciatingly uncomfortable family gathering in Reynolds history. Allison arrived late, clearly having debated not coming at all. Throughout the meal, Mom attempted to maintain normal conversation, while the tension between her daughters made the air feel electrically charged. Finally, over dessert, Mom set down her fork with uncharacteristic firmness. "This stops now," she said, her voice stronger than it had been since Dad's death. "I've lost my husband. I refuse to lose my family. Whatever is happening at the company stays at the company when you're in this house. Ask your younger daughter about loyalty," Allison replied acidly. "About stabbing family in the back. Ask your older daughter about stealing. I countered before I could stop myself." Mom's hand hitting the table silenced us both. "James would be heartbroken to see what's become of his daughters and his company," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You both think you're honoring him, but he valued family harmony above any business success." The guilt her words triggered was overwhelming. Had I betrayed my father's true wishes by exposing Allison's misconduct? Or would allowing the company to collapse under her mismanagement have been the greater betrayal? The dinner ended early and uncomfortably. As the crisis became public knowledge, extended family members began taking sides. Dad's brother thought Allison had been treated unfairly. Mom's sister believed the evidence justified my actions. Family gatherings became impossibly strained or simply stopped happening. During those difficult weeks, Benjamin and Harold provided crucial professional support. But the personal isolation was profound. I'd done what I believed necessary to save the company, but the cost to my family relationships left me questioning whether it had been worth it. The investigation revealed misconduct exceeding even what I had documented. Allison had apparently been planning to force me out completely, having drafted termination papers citing performance issues and unauthorized access to confidential information. Ironically, the very documentation process that had ultimately protected me. As the extent of the financial damage became clear, Allison made a desperate legal countermove, filing a lawsuit claiming I had conspired with Benjamin to fabricate evidence and orchestrate a takeover. The allegation was baseless, given the mountain of documentation, but it extended the corporate drama and further damaged the possibility of family reconciliation. 3 months into the crisis, with the company stabilizing but family relationships deteriorating further, Allison requested a private meeting. She arrived at my apartment rather than meeting at the office, a tacit acknowledgement that this was personal, not professional. "I need your help," she said simply, the words clearly difficult for her to pronounce. "The bank is proceeding with fraud charges unless restitution is made, and I don't have the liquid assets they're demanding." It was the moment I'd seen in the conference room months earlier. My proud, defiant sister reduced to asking for my assistance, but there was no satisfaction in it, only a profound sadness for what our relationship had become. "What are you asking for exactly?" I questioned, needing absolute clarity. Your support with the board to use company resources to settle with the bank, she replied. In exchange, I'll drop the lawsuit and sign whatever paperwork you need regarding the company leadership. The request would essentially use company funds to prevent criminal charges for her misuse of company funds, an ethically questionable arrangement at best. Yet the alternative might mean watching my sister face prosecution and possible imprisonment. I can't unilaterally approve that, I said carefully. But I can propose conditions to the board that might make it acceptable as part of a comprehensive settlement. What conditions? She asked warily. Full admission of responsibility. Complete restitution over time from your personal assets, including selling the properties and luxuries purchased with company funds. Your resignation from the board. And family counseling, with mom and without lawyers. Her face cycled through emotions. Anger, humiliation, calculation, and finally something approaching resignation. I want to retain my ownership shares, even if I have no operational role, she countered. In a blind trust with independent management until restitution is complete, I offered. We negotiated terms late into the night, finding our way to a fragile agreement that might preserve both the company and some possibility of eventual family healing. As she prepared to leave, Allison paused at the door. Did you ever consider just talking to me directly, she asked. Before the documentation and the bank and the board, it was the question that had haunted me for months. Many times, I admitted. But after that board meeting where you said I didn't belong in the family business, I didn't think you'd listen. We'll never know now, will we? She said quietly before closing the door behind her. 6 months after the credit line crisis, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the CEO office, my father's old space that I'd finally moved into after the dust began to settle. The Chicago skyline stretched before me, including several buildings bearing the Reynolds architectural signature. The company that had nearly collapsed was finding its footing again, though the journey remained challenging. The transition from project manager to interim CEO had been brutally steep. I'd spent years understanding the company's operations but had never expected to lead it under crisis conditions. Harold Wilson's mentorship proved invaluable, providing guidance while allowing me to establish my own leadership style. You're not your father or your sister, he advised during our weekly strategy sessions. Don't try to replicate either of their approaches. Find your own voice. Gradually, I did. My background in sustainability became central to our rebuilding strategy, positioning Reynolds Architectural as a leader in environmentally responsible urban development. Our revised mission statement emphasized long-term value over short-term profit, transparency in all business practices, and collaborative relationships with clients and communities. The settlement with First National Bank had been painful but necessary. In exchange for the bank not pressing criminal charges, Allison agreed to a structured restitution plan that would take years to complete. The company contributed to the settlement, but would recover these funds through Allison's gradual repayment and the return of misappropriated assets. The emotional rebuilding proved more challenging than the financial. Allison had begun therapy, initially as part of the settlement requirements, but continuing voluntarily. Her journey involved confronting difficult truths about her motivations and the damage her actions had caused. While her designer wardrobe had been replaced with more modest attire and her luxury penthouse exchanged for a comfortable but unextravagant condo, the most significant changes were internal. Mom became an unexpected facilitator of our fragile reconciliation process. At 68, Catherine Reynolds discovered a strength neither of her daughters had fully appreciated. She insisted on weekly family dinners where business talk was prohibited, creating neutral ground where we could tentatively rebuild basic communication. Your father always said that foundations matter most, she reminded us during one tense meal. That's true for families as well as buildings. The downtown revitalization project became symbolic of our company's transformation. We publicly acknowledged the safety issues, took full responsibility, and invested in proper remediation regardless of cost. The transparency of this approach, though initially painful, ultimately enhanced our reputation. When the project finally opened, 8 months behind schedule but exceeding all safety and sustainability metrics, it was celebrated as an example of corporate accountability done right. New compliance systems were implemented throughout the company, creating checks and balances that would prevent similar misconduct regardless of who held leadership positions. These changes weren't just window dressing. They represented fundamental restructuring of how decisions were made and resources allocated. Benjamin joked that we now had enough transparency to make Glass jealous, but the robust oversight brought peace of mind to employees, clients, and financial partners alike. The credit line was eventually unfrozen as we demonstrated consistent adherence to our new protocols, though we chose to maintain lower debt levels as part of our more conservative financial approach. After my first 6 months as interim CEO, the board offered to make the position permanent. The vote was unanimous, including the proxy vote for Allison's shares held in trust. The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead prompted serious reflection about the company's future leadership structure. I have a counterproposal, I told the board at the following meeting. Rather than continuing with the traditional CEO model, I'd like to establish a collaborative leadership structure with clearly defined areas of authority and mandatory consensus on major decisions. The proposal was unconventional but aligned with the values we were working to rebuild. Under the new structure, I would oversee strategic direction and client relationships, while other executives had equal authority in their domains with structured collaboration requirements for significant decisions. This approach embodies what I believe my father originally intended, I explained. No single person should have unchecked authority, regardless of their last name or ownership percentage. The board approved the model after thorough discussion, recognizing it as protection against future concentration of power while leveraging diverse leadership strengths. 3 months later, we faced a challenging decision about Allison's future role. She had completed the initial phases of her restitution plan and demonstrated consistent commitment to her therapeutic process. During a carefully structured meeting with Harold and Benjamin present, she requested a non-financial position within the company. I understand if the answer is no, she said with a humility that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. But architecture is the only professional world I've known, and I believe I still have value to offer, under appropriate supervision. After extensive consideration and consultation with the board and executive team, we created a position for Allison in business development, an area where her relationship-building skills could be valuable without financial authority. Her role came with clear limitations, regular oversight, and a detailed performance agreement. I won't let you down again, she told me quietly after the terms were finalized. I didn't respond with empty assurances that all was forgiven. We both knew rebuilding trust would take years, not months. But it was a beginning. My personal life, which had been entirely consumed by the company crisis, slowly rebalanced. I began dating Eric, a structural engineer I'd met during the downtown project remediation. Someone who understood the industry pressures but maintained clear ethical boundaries. Weekend hiking trips and cooking classes provided necessary mental space away from corporate responsibilities. On the first anniversary of the credit line crisis, I visited my father's grave alone, bringing his favorite yellow roses and taking time to reflect on the tumultuous journey. I think we're finally building the company you envisioned, Dad, I said to the quiet headstone. Not perfect, but founded on the right principles. Both your daughters are still part of it, though not in the way any of us expected. The autumn wind rustled through the cemetery trees as I sat silently, finding peace in the knowledge that protecting his legacy had ultimately been worth the painful path it required. Later that week, Reynolds Architectural hosted a family dinner for longtime employees and their spouses, a tradition my father had started that had lapsed during Allison's leadership. As I looked around the room at the people who had weathered the company's darkest days and remained committed to its renewal, I felt profound gratitude. Mom attended, looking healthier than she had in years, engaged in animated conversation with Harold and some of Dad's oldest colleagues. Across the room, Allison was speaking with Jason Parker, the project manager whose safety concerns had helped trigger the necessary changes. Their interaction appeared professional and appropriately reserved. Another small sign of progress. Benjamin approached, handing me a sparkling water with lime. James would be proud, he said, nodding toward the gathering. Not just of the company surviving, but of how it survived, with integrity intact. We're not fully there yet, I acknowledged, but we're on the right path. As I prepared to address the room, I glanced at the portrait of my father that now hung in our main conference room. The company he built had nearly been destroyed by family dysfunction, but was being reborn through painful honesty and commitment to his core values. The foundations had held, allowing us to rebuild something perhaps stronger than before. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that family business drama tests not just professional relationships, but the very essence of what family means. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting a legacy and preserving a relationship? Was there a moment when you realized that true loyalty might mean confronting hard truths rather than enabling destructive behavior? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my story of navigating family betrayal and eventual reconciliation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the complex reality of family dynamics in business and beyond. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my journey. And remember, sometimes the greatest acts of love come disguised as difficult decisions. Until next time, this is Morgan Reynolds, signing off.